despite the problems of Delhi evening that Mr. Mahapatra mentioned, so many of you are here. The praise that has been showered on me is humbling. It only raises the expectations and deepens my responsibility to respond to your expectations. I'm sure you will join me first of all in appreciating the great work that Rajiv Khurana, his Vice President and the team is doing in IMCI Delhi, not only transforming this chapter of IMCI, but also influencing a similar transformation in the rest of IMCI in India, including the headquarters in Bombay, who have responded very positively, and I'm glad to hear today that also influencing globally by being a role model. Naturally, India as one of the top 4 economies of the world should excel in every field, and it is but appropriate that we also should catch up on management consulting. When Rajiv conceived this idea of GuruSpeak, he asked me to be the first one. There are several other gurus, senior ones, Mahagurus, as Mr. Mahapatra said. There is Dr. Monoth, I'm sure he'll be appearing in one of the future sessions. There are other gurus. So it's an honor to be here on the first one. This was somewhere in March. At that time itself, I suggested this topic to him. Now, at that time, it might have looked to him or his committee members or anyone else who heard it a rather premature topic to talk about, because we were still deep in the tsunami that Mr. Mahapatra talked about. Actually, the international press has used the term financial tsunami. The first thing that hit the US from where all this began was a critical event in September 2008 when a 158-year-old merchant bank, Bear Stearns, went bankrupt. In my view, it was brewing 6 months earlier. I advised some people I knew in Bear Stearns to look for other jobs. The share price was dropping and dropping, and when a share price drops below 40% of the original market value, you should start worrying. But the chairman and the board were overconfident, even when the share had fallen 70%. So at that time, this topic would have looked very optimistic. But I think it is very pleasant. There is a God somewhere, the Brahman in all of us, that within 6 weeks, there has been such a change. In the last 2 months, you may remember, Indian stock market has gone up, had gone up 50% before the elections. It has gone up another 25% after the elections. Even the US market has recovered 31% in the last 4 or 5 months. I start with describing the crisis in 3 parts. First, look at the global crisis. Secondly, the domestic impact of that crisis for us in India, which is milder than the global crisis. And thirdly, the outlook, which has been changing dynamically over the last few weeks. Then I go into the characteristics of the post-crisis era from the perspective of management consulting as a profession. And there I identify 3 kinds of situations which we will need to deal with. There will be some companies, enterprises, big, medium and small, all over the country, which would have continuing managements, both in India and globally. Globally, the examples are very clear. They have come very often in the papers. For example, the condition of the US government, President Obama, helping General Motors, was that there should be a management change. It's extraordinary that a government would demand the CEO of one of the largest corporations to step down as a condition for aid to the company. Second, there are new managements. The organization has not disappeared as Arthur Andersen did or Bear Stearns did, Lehman Brothers did. And then there are new organizations which are coming out of mergers, acquisitions, diversifications, new entrepreneurial initiatives, redeploying the resources rendered obsolete by the tsunami which hit the organizations that went bankrupt or became Chapter 11 corporations in the US. The third part of my lecture is the management consulting needs of these 3 types of organizations. The continuing managements, the new managements, and the totally new organizations that come about, and what kind of needs we can, as a profession, meet for the customers. Let me begin with the crisis. Internationally, the crisis began in the United States. By now, the story is reasonably well known, but the crisis is still not over. It is still playing out. There are many analysts who are skeptical about the recovery in Dow Jones and the Nasdaq indices. For example, the housing starts data is still negative in the US. There are many people who see the current rally as a desperate attempt at improving morale for some people to book profits and get out of the equity, go back to other kinds of fixed income investments. The US has had 3 crises, 2 of which have come out. The third one is likely to make its impact felt in the next few months. The first was, as you know, the housing mortgage finance crisis. The industry lending, because it had funds, high liquidity. This whole crisis has been driven by liquidity and asset price increase. So they persuaded people to go to bigger homes, although they could not afford the payment schedule. They persuaded some people to have a second home, and this has led to the crisis in the 2 major housing finance companies in the US, and the US government is funding. The Fed has brought in a lot of liquidity. The second crisis is the banking crisis, where the banks, in the name of innovation, which is a good thing up to a point, because of regulatory failure, the banking regulation in the US is good on the commercial banks, but not so good on the investment banks. They brought these products called derivatives of securitizing and selling debts of very questionable quality. And fortunately for us in India, we've been a bit more conservative. Several Reserve Bank governors, starting with Dr. Manmohan Singh, Mr. Rangarajan, Dr. Reddy. Dr. Reddy has recently written a book talking about how more sedate regulations of the Indian banking system has saved us from this financial tsunami. So the bad debt is now being analyzed for stress tests, and many banks are found to be inadequate in their capital, and they have raised for the capital. The third crisis is still under the carpet. It will come out. It is beginning to show, and that is the consumer credit card crisis. There has been excessive issuance of credit cards, various kinds of. I find 2 cards difficult to manage. One is actually good enough, and some people have had 10 cards in the US, and maximum is 100, and they are defaulting on the payment. So the major shift in the citizen psychology in the US and UK, compared to even Germany, which is a bit more conservative, closer to us in thinking. The major shift now, as one of the silver linings to the cloud of this great financial disaster that they have undergone, is that thrift is being rediscovered as a habit by families in the US. They are completely